Hello and welcome to the CAPE podcast. CAPE standing for the Child Abuse Prevention and Education Podcast. My name is Kristi McVie and I am an ex-West Australian police officer who spent 10 years with the police where I was trained as a specialist child interviewer and a child abuse detective. This podcast is all about sharing what I learnt, saw and knew whilst investigating child sexual abuse in the police force. It is also about sharing the knowledge that I gained in that time that helped me with my own parenting of my then 2-year-old daughter. My mission is to help share my knowledge and to help you in your role as parents to keep your kids safe, along with guest experts in the field of child abuse prevention and education, both in person and online. Thank you so much for joining in on the fight to prevent child sexual abuse. Your kids will thank you for it. Hello and welcome back to the CAPE podcast. My goodness, we're already halfway through the year and today I am with John Cardamone. Now, it's interesting, right? Because I have obviously, I'm past episode 30 now on the podcast and I've managed to hassle all my friends and ask all of these people for interviews. And I got to the point where I was like, I don't know who else I can talk to. So I put out a call out on LinkedIn, which was an amazing response. And John put his hand up and said, hey, I'd love to be on the podcast. So thank you so much, John, for, obviously putting your hand up and saying that you'd love to be on the podcast, because otherwise they'd have to listen to me talking about stuff all on my own. How are you, John? How are you doing?
I'm well, and I would just like to say thank you for providing the opportunity for people like myself to share the story, because I think we want to get to a point where we continue to raise awareness, but
Yeah.
I think the other important part is the education side.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, John, you're a parent, you're an advocate, you're a survivor, you're an educator. You're very much like myself in that we have the same opinion. The only way we can stop it is to talk about it and that's how we're going to prevent it. So for the listeners of the podcast, would you be able to just share a bit about your story and whatever you want to tell us about you?
Yeah, so I guess my story goes all the way back when I was 6 years old. I'm 39 now, born and bred in Melbourne, Australia, Victoria, I should say. Well, it is Australia, but if you have any international listeners, yeah. So when I was 6 years old, that's when my sexual abuse happened. However, I think it's really important to share that I was a fairly happy boy, really active, had a thirst to play, and always talking, lots of friends, made friends easily, and still have my childhood friendships, which I'm very lucky to have. Really connected with my family, had a clear and a safe sense of belonging within my family unit. And I think that's really important to share, because sometimes I think we feel that this sort of stuff only happens to people that are, whether it's going through poverty, divorce, separation, whatever
Yeah.
it might be. But I'm certainly was just a, a normal active boy that had a deep dark secret that I was forced to hold, and more than happy to go into that.
Yeah, please. If
If we need.
if you're okay to, sure.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I guess with that, perpetrators use that as a strategy to hold the deep dark secret, especially with young children, because obviously we're all developing, the brain's still developing and understanding what's right and what's wrong. And if you're, I guess I was told that if I did tell anyone, there would be threats of violence against myself and some family members. So
Right.
as a 7-year-old, that's pretty scary. So it took me 2 years to finally have the courage to tell my mum, and
Mm,
I'm really lucky and fortunate that she believed me right away, and I'm a big believer that's when my healing journey began. Understanding a little bit more about trauma. Yeah, if she didn't believe me, I think there would have been more added trauma on top of that.
for sure, for sure. And that's what we hear from survivors all the time about, when they tell that first person, regardless of how long it takes to get to the point of disclosing to someone for the first time, the reaction of that first person matters a lot.
It really does, because I have memories that without a blink of an eye, I was believed, and that's when the police were called. I'm kind of new to this space of talking about it and sharing my story,
Mhm.
but I keep hearing that unfortunately there's a lot of children that are not believed, And I just find that horrific and
Yeah.
really terrible and really sad because I keep hearing that not that it's worse than the actual abuse, but
No.
it can really send children on a different track to what they deserve, and it's
Yeah.
not their fault. So I think a big thing for your listeners, if there is a disclosure, is to absolute believe all children, because although children do have great imaginations, it's really hard to make up a story like that.
Oh, for sure. And in my experience interviewing children in the police, it was very rare. Look, I could count on one hand the amount of times that we were able to say this isn't actually, we don't believe this actually happened. Less than, one hand. So, that's hundreds of children I interviewed, and children don't make things like this up, especially young children.
Mm.
So if you don't mind going into it, and it's okay if you don't want to, but who was your perpetrator? Like, who was how were they known to you?
Yeah, so it was within the family unit, my uncle. And
Okay.
I guess another important point is that perpetrators don't just groom children, but they groom parents, and
Yeah.
they groom trusted adults. And I guess their main aim is to gain access to that child. So, and one way they do that is by building trust. So, from my memory, I remember my perpetrator used to take me, for some reason, I just remember this so clearly. He used to take me going yabbying,
Mm,
and I remember, trying to catch the net. So using the net to catch these things, and I'm not sure why I remember that, but I think it's really important that perpetrators are really, it's a great skill of theirs to build connection. I'm
mm,
all about building connection, but we need to teach our children what appropriate and safe connections are, because they're very smart and they're just trying to fulfill their horrible, disgusting, unspeakable.
yeah.
So another really important point that your listeners need to know, that perpetrators will groom trusted adults and parents to gain access to children. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what happened to me. And from there, it's not that it's easy, but it's a lot easier once that groundwork is built.
Yeah. It's the foundations. They set foundations so that they can gain access, and that everything they say is believed, so there's no issues with gaining access. There's no issues with, hey, let's go
Mhm.
yabbying, I'm going to take John yabbying, and
Mm.
I'm going to have him for a
Yep.
sleepover, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that,
Yeah.
because the parents think, oh, he's taken an interest in our son, he's our safe,
Mm.
he's just one of our safe adults in my son's life, and it's no one's fault other than the perpetrators that happens. But you're right, like, we really need to know what is safe and appropriate behaviors and connections. And I love that language, actually.
And the other thing too, I think it's a bit old school, is that stranger danger. And what I'm wanting people to understand, that yes, there's absolutely, we need to be aware of that. But some of the most dangerous people are part of our family. So
Mm.
instead of saying stranger danger, because some of the strangers are the most caring and supportive people. I mean, we're both strangers to someone.
Yes.
So it's changing that language to tricky strangers,
Yeah.
and children need to be educated on not stranger danger, because if they get lost in a shopping center, they need to know that what is a safe stranger. And so, for example, if I took my son and daughter to the footy, and if I said, if you get lost, you need to find a stranger in a red jacket. So instead of me
Mm.
saying, "Oh, stranger danger," there's 100,000
Yeah.
strangers there. Where to go? They need to be educated and told anywhere they go out to a train station, what
Yeah.
kind of strangers do they need to find, because some of them are the most safe people. And
And
as
they're
I
there
said,
to
I've
help.
seen some of our family members are some of them are really dangerous. So that's really
Yeah.
important.
Yes, that's so true, and great, again, great language, and great that I get criticized on social media sometimes for pointing out that, family members, we can't just automatically trust them because they're actually in our family,
Mhm.
because we don't actually know their motivations, thoughts, and feelings underneath
Yeah.
the mask that they wear, right? And I talk about the fact that we need to be more on the lookout for those tricky behaviors and those tricky people, And it doesn't matter who they are. They can be strangers, they can be other people, but it's more likely going to be someone in your family. And I love how you also mentioned, a stranger in a red jacket, a stranger in a fluoro jacket, or, someone who has
Mm.
rail on their shirt or wherever you are. Because I also believe we need to, whilst we're educating our kids from as little as 2, we can start talking about body safety and
Yeah.
all of those lessons. But whilst we're doing that, we need to be helping our children understand how they can get help when they need it. Things like scenarios that, what could kids do if, what could kids do
Yeah.
if they can't find mum or dad and they're at the footy, for instance, and then that's when you can help them come up to the understanding that, oh, we'll see that person in that red jacket, they're there to help us.
Yeah.
And it's not scaring them, it's actually empowering
Mm.
them.
Absolutely. And I think we forget, like, so I work in schools, and schools do an amazing job at teaching maths, reading and writing, and it's
Mm,
repeated and reinforced. But as parents or trusted adults, it's our responsibility to be teaching our children repeatedly of what about their private body parts, and they're not to
mm,
be touched, and what to do if they are touched.
mm.
They need a simple process, because at the end of the day, it's not any organization's responsibility. Well, they absolutely play a big part.
Yes,
I understand that it is difficult, and you don't know what you don't know. So it's up to
yes,
people like myself and you to educate and provide resources to families if they don't know how to have that conversation. Because at the end of the day, it's easy for us because we've been educated in this field and we know how important it is.
yes.
So I think, yeah, this is just a small part of trying to reach people that need that education.
Yeah, totally. Can I ask about your perpetrator? So he was your uncle, you were 6 at the time that you remember. So, with regards to, and you said he groomed your family, so he was a trusted adult within your family, etc. And that is a story I hear a lot of. Tell me about what made it stop, because you don't have to go into detail, but with regards to how he abused you, and did your parents have conversations with you about this stuff before or after? How did you know to tell
Not
your mum?
Yeah, so
All of that, all
no,
of that. Try and
yeah,
tell me all of that, because that's what I'm
yeah, all of that,
understanding.
yeah, all of
Sorry,
those
that was a
questions in
really
one.
convoluted question, people. I really
No,
apologize. My
I
brain's
get it.
ping
It's
ponging.
It's a tricky topic, and so I totally get it. But no, I understand your question or questions. No, I didn't have any education, and I think a lot of children back in the late 80s, early 90s, there
Yeah,
wouldn't have been a lot of education through schools, or my family certainly didn't have have that education around being body safe.
yeah.
I remember telling my mum. It took me a few years, and I remember I was just continuously crying, because I think part of it was that the release of just telling someone, but also feeling that, making sure that someone believes me. And I'm
Mm,
lucky, although my mum didn't have any education around that area, for her to act protectively right away, and
yeah,
for me, and I was put to a stop, so I didn't have to see the perpetrator ever again,
yeah.
which
Which is
I understand
powerful.
that some people. Yes, absolutely. So, yes, as I was saying, being believed right away from my mum, and the police were called, and that was all dealt with. That was again my biggest healer. Now that I look back and understand about trauma and post-trauma growth, I think being believed is certainly been the biggest factor in my transformation. Did I answer all of the questions that you
I
asked?
was more thinking,
Um,
so between 6 and 8, were you being abused
yeah,
between 6 and 8 by the perpetrator
yes,
until you came
yeah,
and told your mum?
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, so
correct.
sometimes when I was interviewing kids, it very rarely only happens once, right? So and most of the time, the memory is a really interesting thing with regards to remembering or trauma, or when you're abused, because you might remember the first and you might remember the last, but
Mm,
but a lot of the stuff in between sort of melds together, especially if it
mm,
happens regularly and doesn't happen,
yeah,
So I was just kind of thinking, well, I was trying to piece together how long your abuse happened, how it stopped, and how it stopped was because you told your mum and she contacted police. Is that right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in between that, I have a really good memory trying to tell my older brother. at different
Right.
stages.
Yeah.
I honestly feel the feeling where I was and how I was trying to tell him, and
Mm.
I don't know. I still don't
You were so
understand how the
scared
brain
though.
works. Yeah, I just don't understand why I wasn't able to get the words out. I mean, I understand as an educated adult now, but
Mm.
yeah, I just remember I tried to tell him a few times when we had an opportunity that we are just mucking around and playing, and I
Yep.
remember not remember my actual thought process, but remember trying to tell him, but the words just wouldn't come out.
My thoughts with that is, well, with regards to, it's a hard thing to tell
Yeah,
people.
absolutely.
Even as an educated adult now, it's a hard thing to talk about, and
Yep.
therefore, expect any child, every child. It's not easy, and it's never going to be easy. I mean, I think we might have. I don't know if you went and saw that post. We might have connected over it. How disclosing is one of the hardest things anyone can do, let alone a
Mhm,
child which only gets usually one shot at it with police.
mhm.
And
Yeah,
there's so many factors against children when they want to tell someone, so many
yeah,
factors. And so, you had, very lucky circumstances that you had, a mum who was protective, who believed you, who took the right, actions afterwards. It's interesting that you mentioned your brother, because was it just you that was a victim of your uncle, or were there more children that were victims?
look, that's something that I don't know,
Mm.
and yeah, I hope I was the only one, to be
Yeah.
honest with you, but something that we may never find out. It happened so long ago, so we can only hope. But yeah, like again, it's something that hopefully the system was good enough to
Adequate.
put a
Yeah.
stop to it. But we know back in the early 80s and 90s, we've certainly come a long way.
Yeah.
I still think we have a really long way to go in terms of how we approach these unspeakable acts
Mm.
towards children or for any person really. I mean, we're speaking about children, but also happens to adults, unfortunately. So
Very much so.
yeah,
And so you mentioned when we were talking before that you are new to talking about this, right? So I
yeah,
guess, and one of the things that I was presenting to some chaplains, school chaplains yesterday, and I was talking about trauma, and I was talking about how, as adults, we sometimes suppress everything, and we don't
yeah,
talk about it. We don't tell our future partners. We don't say anything to anyone because we've decided to move on and forget about it, right? And
yeah.
then our kids come along, and something all of a sudden pops up in our brain. It might not happen at birth, but usually it does. And then, or your child gets to the age you were when that you were first abused, and all of that stuff starts popping up in your brain, and you can't let it go anymore. You can't push it and suppress it. And I was just thinking about that. I was telling people about that yesterday. I was telling these chaplains, if we don't deal with it at the well, if we don't, it's never gone, is it? Trauma never goes. It's just you learn to, it's like a wound that's, needs a band, or needs stitches, needs a bandage, then needs a band-aid, and then it's a scab, and then it's, a scar, basically. And that's how trauma works, and it's internal. And so with regards to all of that, I'm just wondering, was there a turning point for you that decided, I'm going to start talking about this?
Yeah, so just a bit of background. So once it was all dealt with the authorities, I will certainly saw psychiatrists, and I should mention, while I was being sexually abused, my parents were so concerned about my changing behaviour that I was seeing a psychiatrist
Wow. Okay.
at the time to figure out what was going on, and I still couldn't disclose what was happening to me. So I find that really interesting and amazing that a professional, not just a psychologist, but a psychiatrist wasn't able to
Yeah.
unpack, not that it's his fault or anyone's fault for that matter, but just amazing how the perpetrators work and how they make you feel. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's probably a different for a different time. But I've been relatively okay up until maybe a year and a half ago. And when I say relatively okay, I like over the journey of I get anxiety. So I get
Yep.
really, really bad anxiety peaks. So day
Mhm.
to day I'm okay. Um I've been really well connected with my family and friends,
Yeah.
and which I'm being really lucky and being involved in lots of team sports, and that's
Yeah.
really helped my sense of belonging and that sort of thing. But yeah, you're spot on. When my son is near the age of when I was sexually abused, and I don't know what happened. It just triggered something that
Yeah.
I haven't felt, and I'm happy to go into detail. I would think, I still have memories of when I was being sexually abused. There's like pictures and movie reels that I remember,
Yep.
and there's one particular scene. I would think that my son was there in place of me.
Yeah.
And so, as we know with anxiety, if you don't feel like you're in control or it's uncertain, it can really peak.
Yeah.
So obviously, I was out of control because my mind was taking over. I
Yeah.
was having panic attacks that, my son's going through this. I had this sense of, loss of control, all those things. And that really triggered, really intrusive thoughts
Yeah.
around that. And I really need to seek professional help, which I did. And I'm glad I did because it's helped me understand, how trauma works. Because I'm
Yeah.
like, I've been relatively okay for 30 odd years. What's going on?
Yeah.
Apart from having anxiety, I've been able to manage that, and now all of a sudden it's just gone bang. And
Yeah.
so when I saw the psychologist, he really unpacked how trauma works, and
Yeah.
especially when it comes to being sexually abused and when you have your child, a child near the same age, he said it's relatively normal, which didn't help, but it's good to understand.
Yeah.
So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of background. And right now I'm in a much better place. Like I still have those thoughts, but I don't engage with them like I used to. So yeah.
Yeah, I can relate because I left the police with PTSD. As you can imagine, those movie reels continue to play. It doesn't matter how much
Mm,
you understand, what you understand about trauma, but when anxiety and PTSD decide to play together,
mhm.
it's all bets are off.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
And and it can be really scary.
Yeah, yeah. And so I can totally relate to that and relate to because my daughter was only 2 when I joined the police. And so when I was going and I can relate, but in a way, because when I would interview a child who was the same age as my daughter and going through something so horrendous that I would see my daughter in that movie reel instead of,
Mhm.
so I can relate, except
Yeah.
it obviously vicarious trauma, it's all,
Mhm.
the brain doesn't differentiate. It just knows that there's
Mm.
something to be fearful of, scared of, and it puts
Yeah.
whoever in there to protect us. But yeah, that was my thought process
Mhm.
because you mentioned your children, and I'm thinking, yeah, I bet any money that it doesn't matter how well
Mm.
you've thought you've healed, and you can
Yeah.
you can go along in your life. I don't think people realize this so much, like parents realize,
No.
and then you know
Nope.
I had some trauma at 12. It was nothing to do with, sexual abuse or anything. But when my daughter hit 12, that triggered that trauma from my
Mm.
parents and everything. And I was out of control. It just happened. It was the perfect storm for me where I was going through leaving the police, PTSD, severe anxiety. And then my daughter was, 12, and she was pushing boundaries, and she felt
Mhm.
safe to, like, yell back at me, and my control over my emotions was non-existent at that stage.
Yeah.
So we see that and we understand that, but when you're going through it, you don't understand it.
Absolutely, absolutely not. And that's why, the old school thinking of, oh, don't speak about it because, you're just bringing up the past and that sort of thing. But, that can't be further from the truth. I
Yeah.
think the more we speak about it, the more we heal. And I have a great understanding. Not everyone wants to speak about it, and that's okay because that's part of their protective mechanism.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain point, I used that over 30 years. And I think that's why I've done pretty well because I think my brain really protected me.
Yeah.
But I think the more we talk about it, the more we raise awareness. And I honestly think I say this lightly, but I think we have enough awareness. I think it's more about acting,
Yes.
and let's educate now because we've got so many mental health services now and so many awareness days and weeks and years. We really need to call to action now. And
I
I say that half
know.
jokingly. I think the more promoting and awareness we do is great, but I think we're at a time age now where we really need to act
It's time to
instead of
get
just.
shit done.
Quickly interrupting this episode to let you know that Kristi has a whole library full of resources to support you. If this podcast hits home for you and you want to learn more about cyber safety, abuse awareness and prevention, and how you can protect your children, head to the link in the show notes where you can access free downloads, informative guides, and courses relating to these topics. You can also order Kristi's book, Operation KidSafe, A Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention. If you want to join the fight against child sexual abuse, you can support Kristi to reach a wider audience by leaving a review on this podcast or sharing it with your community.
Yeah, well, you said it. Absolutely. And I think the more we talk about it, and I think every time we talk about it, we need to give something back to people. So it's not just about promotion and creating awareness, but okay, I've spoke to you about all of these things. Let's have an opportunity to talk about, okay, your listeners, what can you do? So I think that,
Great.
and hopefully we get a chance maybe near the end, but I think,
I was going to go there now.
yeah.
So what do you do now? Because I know that you go out and present and you talk in school. So what are you doing with your education and stuff? What do you do?
Yeah, so I think the best thing for me to talk about is what I do with my own kids, because that's what people want to hear. We all work professionally, and we've got to toe a line and be careful what we say. But
Yeah,
I
sure.
think the best thing is to hear is what I do with my own children. So I started educating my own children from a very young age.
Mhm.
But they're both nearly 6 and 4, and I just started when they were 2. So just naming their private body parts by their correct terms.
Yeah.
For your listeners, if they don't know, perpetrators will use nicknames to try and hide, especially for little children. If they're saying garden hose, that's not going to really trigger any parent or safe adult to say, "Hey, what's going on?" So that's just a really bad example, but that's what happens
Yes.
in the real world, so to speak. So educating what their private body parts are, including their mouths, because a mouth, although you can see it and it's not private, it's still a private body part that should not be touched. So I educate my own kids that their mouth is also a private body part. I give them a really simple 2 or 3-step process of what they need to follow if they feel unsafe, whether it's they've been touched inappropriately or they're just feeling unsafe. So step 1 is they say, "Stop, I don't like that." That's it. For a child that's 2 or 3, that's all they can comprehend. I know some kids are smarter, but just really simple. So stop, I don't like that. Number 2, they need to tell mummy and daddy, and that's obviously for us, and that could look different for other families. And I explicitly tell them, if someone says, "If you tell mummy and daddy or someone, we're going to hurt you or we're going to hurt mummy and daddy," that was my experience, that they still tell us.
Yep.
So we have lots of conversations around that. We don't have any secrets. We gather around the table lots, whether it's over dinner, and we have these open discussions that there are no secrets. And we have scenario-based situations. So what would happen if someone touched you on the bum and you didn't like that?
Yeah.
And you'll see my beautiful daughter, she'll say, "Stop, I don't like that."
Yeah.
Then what will you do next if they keep touching you? I'll tell mummy and daddy. What would happen if they told you that they're gonna hurt you really badly or they're gonna hurt mummy and daddy? And she'll say, "Oh, I still tell mummy and daddy." So, they're not in, like, it could be different if they're in that situation, and that's why it needs to be repeated
Yes.
and reinforced all the time, not just a once off. And if we're in the shower, if I'm having a shower with my kids, it's taken the opportunity of naming them, that no one is to touch them.
Yep.
I go to the point where if you're at the doctor's and they need to, look at your bum because you have a rash. If mummy and daddy there, then it's okay. If you're
Yep.
by yourself, then no. So being really explicit, like to the
Yeah.
point where you're breaking it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully that
I'm
helps.
glad. No, look, everything you're talking and everything you're saying and everything you're teaching your young people, I have done the same thing with my daughter. I did the same thing with my daughter. Now, people always say to me, "Oh, but that's just like you're scaring them. You're going into too much detail. Oh, I don't want my child to their innocence to be stolen." What do you say to that?
I haven't look, I have to be honest with you, I haven't really heard that, and I would be really surprised if I did hear that, and I'm really mortified, if
I
that's the
have had
thought
people
process
say
of,
that to me.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, like, it's not their fault. I guess it's what they know.
Yeah.
So it comes back to educating and saying, okay, if that's your mindset, which is fine, how do you know, and how do you feel safe knowing what your 5-year-old would do in a situation? So I'll put it back on them. I'd say that's fine. How do you feel that your 5-year-old or 4-year-old would respond in a situation such as someone taking advantage of them, and just see what their response would be? So it's really being not aggressive or passive aggressive, but just trying to meet where their mindset is, because we need to really start shifting people's mindsets, because we're still in an old school age. I feel we're slowly, I think, coming out of it, but we've still got a huge way to go. So it's really not getting into any sort of battle. It's just really
No.
trying to educate people.
Do you feel your children are scared when you talk about these things, or do you feel like they tell me what your experience is with that?
Yeah, it's only been I'm really surprised. Like, I guess I only know what I know. And no, they're really great discussions. They haven't been scared or anything like that.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
my
I'm just
experience
trying.
with my daughter. She was very excited, especially when she was little, because she would role play. We would role play that Stop I Don't Like It.
Yeah. And that's the same. I only get. I mean, sometimes it's like a game, which I want them to be a bit more serious, but I get at their cognitive level.
Yeah.
But at least they've got like a strategy. So
And if you practice it,
and
it'll
my
be second nature.
yeah, and my kids always ask me, "What happens if someone touches your bum, Daddy?" Well, I'll say stop, and then and the other key is to role model, because again, as adults, I think we forget, we think our children, like, for example, I took my daughter to the footy. We caught the train. She's never been to a train station, and she ran towards the track. And me and my wife were like, "What are you doing? Why did you do that?" And I'm like, and we reflected, and how is she supposed to know? She's never been to a train station.
So
So
true.
it just it made me reflect. Like, we just expect children they're not to know, because it's up to
Exactly.
us as safe adults to teach them. And I think we forget that we explicitly teach our children reading, writing, maths, and so many things which are so critical and important, but we're really missing a piece from a parent point of view, that we need to be teaching these life skills.
Yes, definitely. They are life skills, and they, your children are still quite fairly young, but as they age, those conversations morph into talking about consent, talking about online safety, talking about their first relationships, healthy relationships, like
Oh
that.
my goodness! Don't get me
Those
started.
foundations are very
Yeah.
they're foundational work, which then morphs into all of those things, and then you get to parenting 16 and 17-year-olds, and you'll be like, oh, this is easy, we can talk about anything, nothing's off the table, we can talk about everything, and we have these safe relationships with our parents,
Absolutely.
or even
And
our carers, whoever is your safe person.
yeah, and everyone, and like, it's really complicated, because there's different cultures with different beliefs and that sort of thing. So, and that's okay, but it's just coming back to, I'm a really big believer in trying to educate, but again, telling someone what to do can be really difficult. So, it's creating resources for people to follow that's easy and clear. I think less is more. We don't want a one-page document of how to speak to your children to be safe. So, like, I'm creating like body safe cards, how to speak to children 0 to 2, 4 to 6, and so forth, because I think parents and educators need something to go off. But yeah, I just think the more education, we need to be really explicit with our children. I don't think it's unsafe to do so, and I can understand why families would feel that, but I think they're doing a disservice if children don't know how to act protectively and keep themselves safe. Because unfortunately, I'm a bit of a helicopter parent. I won't
No, you're not.
always.
No, you're
I,
not.
I won't always be around. So I want to give them the tools to be able to use if we're not around.
No, that's fantastic, and that's really all very usable tools and things for your children, and for anyone listening who has children. It's as simple as just having those conversations and not being scared to have those conversations. It's not doing any damage to your children, it's actually empowering them.
Absolutely. And the more we do it, again, I can't say it enough. It needs to be repeated and reinforced, and it needs to be very explicit. I think those are the missing pieces. And I understand, like, truly understand for some families, it's really difficult to talk about. But as the adult, it's your responsibility, and you need to be accountable to ensure that your child is safe and knows what to do. And if you don't know what to do or what to say, as I was saying, we've got so many organizations and websites to
Oh,
see all these resources.
it's
There's absolutely
everywhere.
no excuse. Yeah. So, and that's absolutely not having a go at anyone, because, like I said, everyone's at a different point. It's just, now that your listeners are aware, it's about what are they doing? What's the next steps that they're going to take now that they are aware now?
Yeah, and once you know, you can't unknow this stuff. Like literally, you can't. You
No.
can't just sit on your hands and go, "No, I'm not doing this." And it's interesting because I mean, when I left the police, I wrote a book, and it has kind of taken off recently, and it's been out for 2 years. And so it means that when I wrote the book, I was just thinking, I just want parents to know what I know, and same for you. You just want parents to know what you know, and
Yeah.
it's because we know that this is life-changing stuff. We know that this can either prevent harm or reduce the amount of harm
Mm.
to children.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't we want, we learn about swimming, we teach our kids water safety, we teach
Yeah.
our kids road safety, we teach our kids train
Yes.
safety, we teach our kids all of these safety lessons. This is just another safety lesson.
Yeah, and it needs to be, like, you could argue it's more important than being rowed. Well, being rowed and swimming and all
All of
that's
them,
very safe, but
all
it's
of them
this.
should be part of the life
Yeah,
skills we teach our kids. Yeah, and if we did, I mean, it's starting to change, but if we did, we would see a massive reduction in abuse. And I hope
yeah,
with people like you working and doing what you're doing, me, all of us working together, we're going to see a reduction in the next 10 years,
yeah,
and that would mean we've done a job well done, because at the
yeah.
moment we're seeing an increase. We've seen an increase over the last 10 years and in stats, and it means we've done our job. We're making a difference.
Just to go back to your point of, I think you said when you were sharing this sort of stuff on your social media about
Mm,
family members, and that you're getting a bit of pushback. I think it's really important for everyone to know that 90% of cases of sexual abuse are known to the child.
yeah.
So either, within the family or close friendships. So yeah, that's really important for your listeners to know, over 90%, which is huge.
Yeah. And again, and it's not it's not it's gender. Unfortunately, the highest percentage of gender who does abuse children is men, but there's women offenders as well. So all of these behaviors, regardless of who they are, regardless of
Yeah,
who they are in the family, or who they are to that child, to a child, it's important to know that these are unsafe behaviors, or these, what is unsafe and inappropriate, so that, or what is
yeah,
safe and appropriate, so that when the opposite happens, children know that they go to mum and dad or their safe adult and tell them about it, because then they can prevent it, reduce the harm. But it's not, I get a lot of pushback because I think people don't want to think the worst of family members or of whoever. But I like you, in your case, the perpetrators and the offenders are very good at grooming parents, very good at
yeah.
grooming families. They've been doing it a long time. That's how they get their victims to a point of being able to be trusted with them, and so it's not, it's a life-saving skill to know this stuff.
Yeah. And we don't want to look. I don't want to be scaring people, but
But
it's just
let's
being
scare
aware
people.
and informed. I don't want
Power,
people
knowledge is power.
starting to think about their own family members, but unfortunately, that statistics, it doesn't lie. So it's really
Knowledge is
important just to
power.
be aware. It is, absolutely. So with that knowledge, it's just a call to action now. So if
Yeah.
they're listening and you're enjoying this, the best thing that you can do is to educate and inform not just your own children, but the children in your life, nephews, nieces.
Yeah.
Have a chat with their parents.
Be the safe adult
Yeah.
in all children's lives.
And the
I
thing with safe, Oh, so you go, sorry.
I was just going to say, I talk to young people all the time when I go into schools and stuff, and they come and have a private conversation with me, and I use that language, appropriate and inappropriate, safe and unsafe, and I'm like, it's not, I've had, for instance, just one particular scenario, had a young boy with autism ask me if he could have my number so he could call me or talk to me or like support me. He actually wanted to support me. And I said to him, "Oh, that's so lovely. Like, thank you so much for wanting to help me. But, it's actually not safe to have adults' numbers. You're a child, and it's not safe to have, because we're not actually we've only just met. We're strangers, right?" And I was trying to explain to him about strangers, that we're strangers. I consider myself a safe adult, but really,
Mm.
and luckily I've got good support, and please make sure that you continue to be such a supportive person. But I use the language, it's not actually safe for adults to be friends with kids
Mm.
that we don't know very well. And so, thank you very much for, but, that was just a random young fella that I met. But, our kids, we need to like share what's safe and unsafe and appropriate and inappropriate with them, so they
Mm.
understand it, so that when something happens, because it's going to happen, there's going to be people
Mm.
that act inappropriately and unsafe around them. When it happens, they know what to do. And I
Yeah.
cut you off, so you go here, and hopefully you haven't forgotten your train of thought.
I think I have, but that's okay. But the other conversation just on that, I talk to my kids, what does it feel like to be safe? What does
Mm,
it feel like to be unsafe? Because I think your gut feel is your
mm,
second brain for a reason. And even though they don't understand that, but we use language like, how does your tummy feel?
yeah,
And so they're at an age where they're starting to articulate some words around being safe and unsafe. And
yeah.
even though safe, to my son is to be happy. And absolutely spot on. To be safe, you're feeling happy. I think my daughter used the word unsafe means frustrated. So she's getting there, but it's just having these, and you might feel frustrated, but it's just starting the conversation at a young age. So
Yeah. And they'll have the
yeah,
language. They've got language that they can then share with someone if something
yeah.
happens. And that's the hard part. I think as a 6-year-old self, your 6-year-old self probably didn't have the language to be able to explain what was happening.
Oh, no. And it's no one's fault. Like, because what you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really, again, I keep harping onto it, but it's about a call to action and to educate yourself and others
Yeah.
now to your
Well,
listeners.
if they're listening to this podcast, they will go out and they'll have those conversations, and they'll do, what we said, because you wouldn't be here listening to this podcast if you didn't want to take action.
Well, sometimes that's the issue though. We're preaching to the converted. So
Yeah.
the converted need to go out and preach more.
Yeah.
And they can blame us, but
I
start
know.
talking about it.
I don't know about you, John, but when my daughter was doing netball and stuff, and this, you've got a few, it's probably coming for you now, in the future. I would go to netball, and something would happen, or someone would bring something up, and then, there would be a 2-hour conversation around body safety and child safety. And then all of a sudden I noticed people weren't stopping to talk to me anymore.
Well, well, that's not very nice.
I know, no, it's not because of that, but that I'm the
No.
person that
Yeah.
everyone turns to when they want advice on this stuff, and I'm sure you are too.
Awesome.
You're that safe
Absolutely.
adult that people can get that information from, or that safe adult. And you know, we all have a part to play in protecting kids, all of us, not just our own
We
children,
do.
any children.
Yep, big. It's all of our responsibility. And I'd just like to share, I'm really big on, so for me, my biggest healers have been a connection and a sense of belonging. And my tagline I like to share is that children spell love a different way. It's another
Mhm.
four-letter word, time, Time. So I think that as adults, we've got competing priorities around sport, social commitments and work, but it's really your responsibility as a safe adult and a parent to spend quality time with your children and building that foundation, because it's one thing to have those conversations around what's safe and unsafe, but without
Mm.
that foundation of having safe connections and making that time and effort, then it can be really hard to have those conversations. So I would start with building your relationship and connection with your children, building their sense of belonging, because once they have a sense of belonging, that really builds their confidence and resilience, and that feeling of feeling safe and protected at all times. And I think that's a critical part of building that foundation, to have those vital conversations, because
So
without it, it
true.
makes it a little bit harder.
Yeah, so true. And I think that's a beautiful place to end this conversation. But it's so interesting. So much of what you've said today is stuff I've said on like repeat, and also the time thing. Like I was thinking about time this morning. In fact, is that the most important thing we can give our children is time. And when they're little, we give them a lot more time than when they actually start becoming more independent. And sometimes it just happens because we get busier or they get busier, but time is the only thing we have that we can't get back. We can give them all the things in the world, all of the new gadgets and toys and things, but time is something we can't get back and we can't re-give them. So yeah, time plus energy, and you know, that loving energy that is going to that, so that they feel safe to come to us if something does happen, or to ask us the questions that they need answered, is so vitally important. So thank you so much, John. I've loved talking to you, because you basically the male version of me, because everything you've said is what I say.
Great. No, well, that's great.
It's been an amazing conversation, and I think it's so lovely to hear that you are sharing your story, and that you've got these beautiful conversations with your young people, and you're just, you know, you're over on the East Coast sharing what I share over there. So I'm really grateful for the conversation, for you putting your hand up to talk about this with me. Yeah, thank you so much.
No, thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for having me on your podcast. So yeah,
I'm
big
so
thank you.
grateful to you. And for anyone else listening, if they want to connect with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn as John Cardamone, on
I will share
Facebook,
that.
Instagram, and I've got my own website up now. It is johncardamone.com.au,
Yep.
where I've only got one free resource, but I'm developing body safe cards that everyone will have access to. And on that website, I just share my story and the resources. With your permission, I'll have this podcast up there so they can also
Perfect.
listen to that, and a few other podcasts. So absolutely reach out, come on the website. I've got my email there too, and connect with me on the socials. I think that's what
That's
they call it.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And we will definitely keep in touch. Who knows? I might be over in Melbourne later in the year, early next year. So that would be awesome to meet in person.
Absolutely. I've never been to WA, so I might have
Well,
to get over.
let us know if you come over, and we'll take you for a drive down to Margaret River.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. Education empowers children and empowers parents, and education prevents abuse. That is why I'm here, and that is why you are here. So thank you. If you want any further information or support, follow me on social media, either under Kristi McVie or Cape AU social media accounts. I'll put the links in the show notes. You can also purchase a signed copy of my book, Operation Kid Safe, via the website at www.cape-au.com. Also on my website is a free ebook titled 10 Tips to Keep Your Kids Safe from Abuse, and self-paced courses for parents to help you in your journey of child abuse prevention. Don't forget to join our free Facebook group called Operation Kid Safe Parenting Group. Please see the show notes for any extra information, links and help should you be looking for extra support. Thank you once again for giving a shit about preventing child sexual abuse. See you next time.